I just got divorced and moved abroad. My ex-husband immediately married his mistress. During the wedding, a guest said something that drove him crazy, and after that, he called me Lena Whitmore here. The night I walked away from my marriage did not involve screaming tears or slam doors. It happened quietly in a restaurant that once symbolized everything I believed love was supposed to be. Ryan Whitmore, my husband of 8 years, sat across from me at a small corner table. This was the same place where he had proposed, the same table where he once promised we would grow old together. Now it was where we had agreed to say goodbye. He arrived late. No apology, no explanation. His attention never left. His phone. I did not need to ask who he was texting. I already knew. Madison Cole, his secretary, the woman who had slowly replaced me while I was still legally his wife. I ordered his favorite meal out of habit, not love. He barely noticed. He cut into the steak, chewed without interest, smiled at his screen, and treated me like a task he had already completed. I told him I was leaving the city. I told him I was moving to a small coastal town in Oregon to start over. He finally looked up, surprised for a brief second, then shrugged. "Whatever you want," he said. "Madison and I are planning our wedding. She knows how to make me happy." That was the moment something inside me went silent. I was not angry. I was not heartbroken. I was simply finished. This dinner was not about closure. It was about release, about cutting the last invisible thread, tying me to a man who had already erased me from his future. When we stood up, he paid the bill and walked out without looking back. No goodbye, no gratitude, no regret. I sat there alone, staring at a plate I could not finish, finally understanding the truth. I was not losing a husband. I was gaining my freedom. And that quiet decision would change everything. People often think a marriage ends because of one dramatic betrayal, a scandal, a fight, another woman. But my marriage did not collapse in one moment. It eroded quietly day by day until there was nothing left to save. When Ryan and I first married, we were a team. We were young, ambitious, and building everything together. I believed in him. When no one else did. I supported his career, managed our home, and put my own goals on hold, because I thought that was what love required. As his career advanced, something changed. Ryan began to see himself as the center of the world. His work mattered. His stress mattered. His time mattered. Mine became flexible, optional, invisible. Conversations turned into instructions. Affection turned into silence. I became someone who handled logistics, not a partner whose opinions held weight. When I spoke about my work or my ideas, he barely listened. When I was tired, he told me I had it easy. Our marriage became like a house with a beautiful exterior and a crumbling foundation. To outsiders, we looked successful, well-dressed, polite, stable. But inside, I was living with emotional neglect that slowly drained the life out of me. Ryan did not insult me directly. He did something worse. He dismissed me. He made me feel unnecessary, replaceable. I learned to stop asking questions. I learned to stop expecting appreciation. I learned to swallow disappointment and tell myself this was normal. That marriage required sacrifice. That love meant endurance. But there is a difference between compromise and erasure. I was not unhappy because Ryan worked late. I was unhappy because I no longer existed in his life as a person. I was an accessory to his success, a background figure in a story he believed was only about him. By the time Madison appeared, the marriage was already dying. She did not destroy what was strong. She stepped into a space that had been left empty for a very long time. And deep down, I knew it. That realization did not make me furious. It made me tired. When I discovered the truth about Madison, there was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting, no tears splashed across the kitchen floor. What I felt in that moment was not rage. It was clarity. I found the messages by accident. Ryan had left his laptop open on the dining table. A notification appeared. Her name, a heart emoji, familiar words that once belonged to me. I read enough to understand everything. They did not talk. Like two people who had just crossed a line. They spoke like two people already living in a future where I no longer existed. Plans, inside jokes, complaints about me, subtle but cruel. I closed the laptop carefully, as if making noise might shatter the fragile calm holding me together. That night, Ryan came home late. He smelled like unfamiliar perfume and false confidence. He talked about work. He did not look at me. I did not accuse him. I did not ask questions I already knew the answers to. I simply listened. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as my husband, not as the man I once loved, but as someone who had chosen comfort over honesty and ego over loyalty. I realized something then. If I screamed, he would deny it. If I cried, he would minimize it. If I begged, he would resent me. So, I did none of those things. I made my decision quietly. I contacted a lawyer the next morning. I gathered my documents. I separated what was mine. I stopped sharing my thoughts, my fears, my hopes. Ryan noticed the change but misunderstood it. He thought my silence meant surrender, that I would stay, adjust, accept less like I always had. He was wrong. I did not leave because of Madison. I left because I recognized the woman I was becoming if I stayed smaller, quieter, slowly disappearing. The day I packed my bags, Ryan asked me why I was being so calm. I told him the truth. Because I am already gone. And this time, I was not coming back. I did not announce my departure to the world. I did not post quotes about healing or freedom. I simply left. 2 weeks after that final dinner, I packed my clothes, my personal documents, and a few objects that still felt like mine. Everything else I left behind. The apartment, the furniture, the life that no longer fit me. I moved to a small coastal town in Oregon called Harbor Pine. It was the kind of place people passed through, not a place they escaped to. Quiet streets, old houses, the sound of the ocean carried on the wind. The house I moved into had belonged to my grandmother. Modest 2-story home with a small garden out front, and roses climbing along the stone wall. She used to tell me that roots matter more than appearances. I finally understood what she meant. No one in Harbor Pine knew who I used to be. No one asked about my marriage. No one cared about my past. I was not Ryan Whitmore's wife here. I was just Lena. The first few weeks were strange. The silence felt loud at night. There were moments when I reached for my phone out of habit, only to remember there was no one I needed to update. No one whose approval I was waiting for. I slept better. I breathed deeper. I walked along the shoreline in the mornings and let the cold air clear my thoughts. For the first time in years, my mind was not racing to keep up with someone else's expectations. I did not feel lonely. I felt space. Space to think. Space to remember who I was before I learned how to shrink. Myself. Space to imagine a future that did not require permission. People assume starting over is terrifying, that it is a sign of failure. But standing in that quiet house with my suitcases still unopened, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Relief. Leaving was not running away. It was choosing myself. And even though I did not know it yet, this quiet town was where my real life was about to begin. Healing did not arrive all at once. It did not come with fireworks or dramatic revelations. It came quietly through routine, through work, through small moments that slowly stitched me back together. After I settled into the house, I began looking for a job. I had a master's degree in interior design and years of experience I had never fully used. In my marriage, my career had always been secondary, convenient, adjustable. Here, it finally mattered. I applied to a small design studio in town, Stone and Shore Design. It was owned by a man named Daniel Brooks. During the interview, he did not ask about my marital status. He did not ask why I left the city. He asked about my ideas, my taste, my process. That, alone, felt revolutionary. I got the job within a week. Work became my anchor. I woke up early, walked to the studio, and lost myself in sketches, textures, and plans. No one interrupted me. No one dismissed my opinions when I spoke. People listened. Daniel trusted me. He gave me responsibility instead of supervision, feedback instead of control, respect instead of expectation. Outside of work, my life remained simple. I cooked for myself. I worked in the garden. I read books I had bought years ago, but never had time to open. My phone stayed quiet. And for the first time, that silence felt peaceful, not empty. I did not talk about Ryan. I did not replay old arguments in my head. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. Healing was not about forgetting the past. It was about no longer living inside it. Little by little, I felt stronger, more present, more real. The woman who had spent years minimizing herself was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, steadier, and far more certain of her worth. I was not rebuilding to prove anything to anyone. I was rebuilding because my life finally belonged to me. The news of Ryan's wedding reached me the way most things from my old life did now. Distant, muted, unimportant. It was my friend Claire who told me. She called one evening while I was cooking dinner, her voice careful as if she were handling something fragile. "Next Saturday is his wedding," she said. "The big one. Madison is getting everything she ever wanted." I waited for a reaction that never came. No tightness in my chest, no anger, no sadness, just a brief pause. I thanked her for telling me and went back to stirring the soup. In New York, the event was being advertised like a spectacle, a luxury venue, imported flowers, a guest list filled with people Ryan wanted to impress, the kind of wedding designed to prove success rather than celebrate love. Claire kept talking, filling the silence with details she thought might matter to me. How expensive the dress was. How Madison was showing off. How Ryan looked proud, triumphant, as if he had won something. I listened politely, then stopped her. "Claire," I said, "I really am fine." And I was. That same day, I spent the morning walking along the coast. The wind was cold. The sky was clear. I stopped for coffee at a small cafe where the barista already knew my name. In the afternoon, I worked in the garden. Dirt under my nails, sunlight on my face. While they were rehearsing entrances and speeches, I was choosing herbs for dinner. That was when it truly hit me. Indifference is not numbness, it is freedom. I did not need to see photos. I did not need updates. Their celebration belonged to them. My life belonged to me. That night, I invited a few CO workers over for a simple meal. We talked about work, about travel, about nothing important at all. Laughter filled the house my grandmother had left me. Somewhere across the country, Ryan was preparing for the biggest day of his life. And I was already living mine. For the first time, I understood something clearly. When you stop caring, you stop being controlled. And that was a victory no wedding could ever match. I thought the story would end there. A wedding I did not attend. A life I had already outgrown. But sometimes the past makes one final appearance, not to pull you back, but to reveal what was always hidden. The morning after the wedding, Claire called me again. This time she did not bother softening her voice. "Lena, are you sitting down?" I smiled to myself and took a sip of coffee. I was standing in my kitchen, sunlight spilling across the counter. "I am standing," I said calmly. "What happened now?" "There was an unexpected guest at the wedding," she said. "Someone who knows you." That caught my attention. It turns out Ryan's father had invited an old business acquaintance, a man named Frank Miller. Frank had known my grandmother years ago, a loud man, friendly, the type who talked more when he drank. Claire said that near the end of the reception, Frank had been sitting at a table with a few guests, wineglass in hand, telling stories in a voice loud enough for half the room to hear. He started talking about a trip to Oregon, about a small coastal town, about running into his old friend's granddaughter. My chest tightened just slightly. "He talked about me, Lena," Claire continued. "About how well you were doing, about your house, your garden, your work. Apparently, someone at the table asked if I was just visiting. Frank laughed and said, 'No, she lives there now. Her grandmother left her the house. She is thriving.' The guests leaned in. Then someone else asked if I was working. Frank waved his hand and said, 'Of course, she works at a design studio. Her boss adores her, says she just landed them a major hotel project.' Claire paused, letting the silence build. And then she said, 'Someone joked that I must be making good money.' Frank laughed again. 'Salary is nothing. That girl is set for life. Her grandmother left her a fortune. Millions.' I closed my eyes. Claire told me that at that exact moment, Ryan and Madison were standing nearby, greeting guests. They heard everything. Word by word, table by table, the whisper spread. The ex-wife he discarded was not struggling. She was not broken. She was wealthy, independent, free. And the groom? The groom was in debt. One casual comment, one unfiltered truth, and the illusion Ryan had spent years building began to crack in front of everyone he wanted to impress. I did not need to be there. The truth had arrived on its own. According to Claire, the room changed the moment those words landed. At first, Ryan did not react. He stood frozen, his smile stiff, as if his mind was struggling to catch up with reality. Madison's hand tightened around his arm, her expression locked somewhere between shock and calculation. People nearby began whispering, quiet at first, then louder. Heads turned, eyes lingered. Phones were lowered, forgotten in hands that suddenly wanted to know more. Ryan had built his identity on perception, success, control, superiority, and now in a matter of seconds, that carefully polished image was cracking. Someone laughed awkwardly. Another guest asked a question that should never be asked at a wedding. Is that true? Ryan turned toward Madison. Not gently, not lovingly. He looked at her like a man realizing the ground beneath him was gone. What did he mean? Ryan asked, his voice sharp. About millions. Madison tried to smile. She tried to brush it off. You know how drunk people exaggerate, she said. But the doubt had already taken root. Then someone else spoke up. A man from the finance sector. He mentioned a rumor about Ryan borrowing money, a small amount, just to cover some expenses. That was when Ryan lost control. His voice rose. Glasses rattled on the tables. He demanded answers. Madison tried to pull him away, whispering that people were watching, but it was too late. Ryan grabbed a champagne glass and crushed it in his hand. Blood spilled onto the white tablecloth. Someone screamed. Music stopped. He shouted. Accusations, regret, fury, all of it exploded at once. You lied to me, he yelled. You made me look like a fool. Guests backed away. Parents rushed forward. Staff froze in place. The wedding had turned into a spectacle no one could ignore. Ryan flipped a table. Food crashed to the floor. The cake stood untouched for a brief second, then followed everything else into chaos. Madison cried. Her perfect dress was stained. Her crown slipped from her hair. This was the cost of living for appearances. When the image breaks, there is nothing left to hold you together. The man who once believed he had won everything stood in the center of the room, exposed, humiliated, and completely alone. I was miles away, watering plants in my garden. And yet, the truth had finally reached him. Not through revenge, through reality. What happened at the wedding did not stay in that ballroom. According to Claire, videos began circulating before the guests even reached their cars. A groom screaming, tables overturned, blood on a white tablecloth, a bride crying while people recorded instead of helping. By morning, the footage was everywhere. Ryan's business partners saw it. Clients saw it. Investors who once praised his discipline and leadership saw a man who could not control his emotions in public, let alone in a boardroom. Meetings were canceled. Calls went unanswered. Contracts were quietly withdrawn. No one needed an explanation. Reputation speaks for itself. Within weeks, the company Ryan had built began to collapse. Senior employees resigned. They took clients with them. No one wanted to stay loyal to a leader who had become a liability overnight. Madison disappeared from public view just as quickly. The pregnancy she had spoken about so proudly was suddenly never mentioned again. Whispers followed her instead of admiration. Doors closed where they once opened. Ryan tried to salvage what he could. Dinners with potential clients. Promises he could not keep. Apologies that came too late. But trust once broken does not return on demand. Claire told me he started drinking heavily. That he looked older, thinner, like someone constantly bracing for bad news. I listened without satisfaction. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel pleased. I felt detached. This was not punishment delivered by my hand. It was the natural outcome of choices made in arrogance and secrecy. A life built on illusion eventually collapses under its own weight. People like to call this karma, as if it is something mystical or cruel. But it is not. It is simply cause and effect. And while Ryan was busy losing everything he thought defined him, I was gaining something far more valuable. peace. While Ryan's world was shrinking, mine was quietly expanding. I stopped receiving updates about him. Not because people stopped talking, but because I stopped asking. His story no longer had a place in my days. I had work to do, a life to build, a version of myself to honor. At the studio, I was trusted with larger projects. My ideas were not questioned, only refined. When I presented designs, people leaned in, instead of looking past me. For the first time in my adult life, my value was measured by my ability, not my availability. One afternoon, Daniel called me into his office. He thanked me for my work, then offered me a raise and more responsibility on an upcoming project. I remember walking home afterward with a strange feeling in my chest. Pride, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that settles deep and stays. At home, the garden was in full bloom. Roses climbing higher, herbs thriving. Every plant felt like proof that care given consistently creates growth. I spent my evenings reading, cooking, learning new things. I signed up for classes I had postponed for years. I traveled alone without explaining myself to anyone. I did not need validation. I did not need witnesses. I realized something important during those months. I had not escaped a bad marriage. I had escaped a version of myself that believed love required sacrifice without limit. Freedom did not arrive as revenge. It arrived as ownership. Ownership of my time, my energy, my future. Ryan once told me I would struggle without him. Standing in my kitchen, surrounded by a life I built with my own hands, I finally understood how wrong he had been. I did not win. I was freed. And that freedom was worth everything I left behind. For a long time I thought strength meant enduring, staying, proving my loyalty by surviving discomfort and silence. I was wrong. Real strength was knowing when to leave without destroying myself in the process. I did not expose Ryan, did not confront Madison. I did not plan revenge or wait for karma to arrive. I simply chose a different life. And in doing so, I removed myself from the damage they were creating. What happened to them was not my victory. It was their consequence. My victory was waking up without anxiety, working without being diminished, loving myself without needing permission. I learned that walking away does not mean you lost. Sometimes it means you finally chose yourself. If you are listening to this and you feel invisible in your own life, hear this clearly. You are not weak for being tired. You are not broken for wanting peace. And you do not need to stay where you are no longer valued. Sometimes the most powerful response is silence. Sometimes the greatest revenge is a life well lived. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need courage today, and leave a comment below. Are you still holding on, or are you ready to walk away and begin again? Your story matters too.